Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Today, our guest Cindy Watson will show us how to get what you want in the boardroom and the bedroom. Cindy, thanks for being with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Can't wait for the conversation.
Oh, Cindy, you've written a wonderful book, The Art of Feminine Negotiation. You say all of life is a negotiation. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I had my epiphany because I think the word negotiation is so loaded and a lot of people end up backing away or shying away from it because you picture immediately people in the boardroom with, the big power suits on. And I had my epiphany that, my gosh, really, when you think about it, whether you are dealing with your kids, with your intimate partner, with suppliers, with your bank, with insurance companies, or multi-million-dollar deals, so whether personally or professionally, at some level, it's all a form of negotiation. Even our own mindset. Negotiating our own mindset is probably our first and most important negotiation.
As soon as I read that, I kept thinking, if we put that little cartoon balloon over us, it probably is 90% of what we do all during the day. We don't think of it. It's not designated that way because, to be honest, we think of lawyers and I think salespeople as negotiators, maybe union negotiators. Yeah. And you are one of those, right?
Yeah, I am. Actually, okay. That's funny you use that example. 30 years and counting.
Do you want to admit that you're a lawyer or should we not tell our audience, which we already did?
Well, you've already done it. You've outed me.
I've outed you. Okay, I'm sorry about that. So now it's so important, and I can see from your book how important it is. And obviously we see the difference it makes for ball players, millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. How come we're never taught this?
I know I think it is probably the most important skill set we'll ever learn, and yet we're not taught it. And not only are we not taught it, but to the extent that we do hear things about negotiation, I think most of what we learn is based on myths. And I believe it's one of the reasons the world's so out of balance today.
For most of us, where do we use negotiation? And in your experience, where have you seen it? I'm talking about the common person, myself included, in our daily lives, not obviously just lawyers and the professionals who we think of in that capacity.
Yeah. And it's fun. I think people don't negotiate enough because we don't bring intention because we don't think of them as negotiations. So most people would certainly think of, if you're buying a car, for example, they come there prepared, expecting that they're going to negotiate. Maybe even over their lease. If you're renting or the purchase of a house, certainly people will recognize that as a negotiation. But I think there are so many opportunities, whether it's for your phone provider, whether it's for those insurance bids, just every aspect of our life can be a negotiation. And if we just bring a little bit more attention to that and show up and do a little bit of preparation, you're going to get better outcomes.
And I have to tell you, in going through your book and preparing the show, The Art of Feminine Negotiation, I really feel empowered. Now, obviously, I'm a male, and you and I were kidding about that before the show, but I think you could have changed the name of this easily because it certainly applied to me. Many times I read things in the book, I said, oh, wait, I could have learned from that. I could have done better. I should have done that. So I think if for the males that's listening, don't just turn this over to your daughter or your wife. We can all learn from it and pick up a lot of great tips.
Thanks for saying that. And to be honest, I agonized for quite some time about whether to even use the word feminine, partly for that reason, because it was like I was cutting half the audience out right out of the gate, but also because there's no one way to be a woman, a man, or any of the spaces in between. And when I speak of feminine, it's not even about women versus men. It's more about we all have masculine and feminine energy. Call it the yin and yang, if you will. But for so long, I think we've been conditioned to see those so-called feminine traits as a liability, and both men and women end up stifling them. And that's where I think things have become skewed.
And now you're also an entrepreneur. You're involved, obviously, as an attorney. Are women and, the female in general, is that seen as being a weakness at the negotiating table, or is that changing today?
I think we're seeing a shift, but it's going to be a long time coming. I think a lot of people believe, the shift has already happened, but we are definitely not there yet. Unconscious gender bias still raises its ugly head. And, I think a lot of people love, and women in particular, to be honest, love to point and say that those biases are from, men against women. But I don't think anything's going to really meaningfully change until we start recognizing that it's also biases by women against other women and even biases against ourselves internally. But yeah, I think women tend to not ask for what they want. We don't ask for enough. We don't ask often enough. And you either end up getting women shying away from negotiation because they think of it as conflict and don't want it, or they do what I was guilty of, I confess, and bring what I call that overcompensating energy to the table. So I think we are definitely seeing differences in how we show up and how we're received.
And it's interesting that you point that out, and I saw that in the book, and I was kind of shocked. It's not just men and women as two opposites. It's biases that women also have against women. So you, now today, probably half the lawyers and negotiators are women, or a high percentage of them, higher than it was years ago. So there's biases even in two women negotiating together, or at least at the table as part of a team.
Yeah. And one of the studies that was most shocking to me, like as I was writing the book, I thought I was pretty sophisticated about unconscious gender bias because I've, practiced social justice for over 30 years now, done a lot of discrimination work. But the one that really shocked me was young women writing their SAT exams. And this study's been done with various permutations of it, but half the control group were asked to identify their gender in advance of writing the test, and the other half didn't have to. And over again, Bill, the group that were asked to identify their gender, simply check off whether they're male or female, actually performed more poorly. So not only is there biases by women against other women, but when I said women against ourselves, think about the power of an unconscious gender bias. We're simply bringing our gender to our attention has us actually underperform. So this conditioning runs deep, and I think it's going to be a while before we really fully see a shift out of that.
Now, I copied a statement from your book. You say the first and most important negotiation is with yourself. I would have thought the enemy, I'm looking over there, him, her, that business, that group, etc., that organization. Can you explain what that means and how it applies to each of us?
Yeah, I think so much of the reason people don't negotiate their best lives, not to be too dramatic about it, but I think we can actually negotiate better lives by being more intentional about how we show up and the things we negotiate. And that starts with negotiating our mindset, right? I mean, from that conditioning that we have for women in particular, for example, from the time you're really young, that keep yourself a little small, don't be too big or you're going to get chopped off at the knees, play nice, be the provider. And we hear about that a lot these days, but we're not also paying attention to the fact there are similarly conditioning that detrimentally affect young boys, right? From the time they're young, they're taught, but real men don't cry. Real men have to show up in this particular way. So we have this deep-seated sort of gender biases that end up affecting how we show up.
Now, I noticed, and this might be your lawyer in part of you coming out, but I think it's on page 8 of your book. You start the book off with a pledge, and you tell the readers you have to sign this first, or you should. You don't make us sign it, of course. Yeah. Why is that, though?
I think there's power, and it's funny, I never thought of it as being the lawyer and sort of signing a contract. I actually think part of negotiating our mindset, we don't often keep promises to ourselves, right? We like, I'm going to stop eating chocolate. And then tomorrow, okay, maybe it'll be the next day. And every time we do that, we send a little message to our brain. That's just Cindy saying she's going to quit a game, but you don't have to believe her. So as we start getting more intentional about negotiating our mindset and getting rid of those limiting stories, asking more powerful questions of ourselves, and making commitments to ourselves that we hold ourselves accountable to, I think that's when we start really seeing profound shifts. So to me, that pledge wasn't just a piece of fluff or an extra page to throw in there. I think if people start by actually putting pen to paper and sign off on that pledge, there's a little something that shifts inside where they show up a little bit more intentionally about playing full out, answering the questions in the book as the exercises come up.
And again, to our audience, it's really a very simple pledge, and it just says, I'll participate fully, I'll think about the questions, and I'll dig deep within myself and recognize that I'm more powerful, basically, than I think I am. So it's just a fun pledge, but I think it does. But anything we sign, I think, actually makes us realize we're making a commitment and dig a little deeper and do a little more. Now, from teachers and coaches, I've heard that, since the pandemic, but basically from social media, things are getting a little harder. The social interactions and negotiating is a social interaction. Have you found that? Is that happening with negotiation, or is there anything that would overlap that we should know about?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bill. And it's something, to be quite honest, I'm quite worried about. I think that we are going to look, 100 years from now, probably 50 years from now, maybe even less. We're going to look back on this period of time and see this as such a profound shift in how the world operates on a global scale, economically at every level. And certainly one of those, this has so expedited our lack of socialization. We'd already seen some of it with technology where people are, younger kids with their cell phones and their face buried in there as they're texting and not even communicating in the same room. But now we're seeing negotiations being done over Zoom, much more over telephone, even over text. We're seeing much less social engagement. And there's risks that come with that, frankly. I mean, a big part of negotiation, effective negotiation, really effective communication is about reading the signs, right? Read the body language of the other person. Be really intentional about your own body language, watching for those both micro and macro expression changes on the face, and really catching in terms of the tone of voice and the pacing and all of those little subtleties that we get. And so much of the art of feminine negotiation in particular is built on rapport building and building trust and showing up with empathy. And it is harder to do that when we're distanced and always separated by a screen. So I think we're going to have to make more of an effort to really build human connection, to build those relationships. And remember that negotiation at its core, whether personally or professionally, depends on human connection.
Well, that's even more of a reason to read your book, The Art of Feminine Negotiation. Now, Cindy, at this point in the show, I like to let our listeners know, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest today is Cindy Watson, W-A-T-S-O-N. The book is The Art of Feminine Negotiation. And Cindy, would you tell us about a website where we can find out more information about you and the book?
Absolutely. I'd say two things. One, if you want to just know a little bit more about it or access a bunch of resources, I do weekly blog posts and podcasts. Just go to artoffemininenegotiation.com. That's artoffemininenegotiation.com. And if you want, as sort of a gift for your listeners, if you want to go to artoffemininenegotiationbook.com, normally those free resources are only available for people who bought the book. But I love the work that Bill does here, and I'm happy to share with his listeners. Go there. You'll get access to all kinds of resources.
We love that magic word, free. It's a big one on this show. So I think our audience will take heed. And of course, as always, we'll give that information again. If you didn't get it down or you want to get it, you can get hold of the pencil and paper, and you'll get a few more times before we wrap up the show today. Why are women afraid to ask for things? I know from going through your book, it's almost, you don't use the word timid, but they seem shy, let's say. Why is that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to some of the conditioning and that unconscious gender bias we were talking about. And it's interesting. A lot of the studies show even parents who believe that there is no difference in how they treat their children based on gender, their expectations of their children are different. And even the way they mark milestones, a lot of studies show parents will add milestones and suggest that their young boys are further along the path than their daughters are, despite the objective evidence to the contrary. So as young as kindergarten, I think young girls are taught really quickly, keep yourself small or you're going to face consequences. You'll be shunned. Whereas if you think about it, young boys get their social status from a really young age by making themselves larger than life. So I think there's some really deep-seated conditioning there that cause women to be hesitant to step into the full force of their power. And to be honest, Bill, it's not that long ago in human history, if you think about it, not only could women not hold property, but we were considered to be property. We couldn't vote. We weren't recognized as persons in the eyes of the law in some jurisdiction. And not to be too dramatic, but it's not that long ago in human history that women who stepped into their power were considered witches and burned at the stake. So I do believe there's some generational conditioning that causes us to believe we need to play small, play nice. And that translates to women being much less likely to ask for what they want or even ask for enough. Studies show that men who are presented with a first-time job offer, I think 62% of men will ask for more. They'll negotiate. They'll see it as an opportunity to negotiate compared to only 7% of women. That is a pretty staggering differential. And if you don't ask, you're not likely to get.
Cindy, you used the term play small. Can you explain to our audience what that means? Because when I first read that in your book, I was a little confused by it. So what does that mean pertaining to women? Yeah, no,
thanks for giving the opportunity to clarify that. I think playing small is like when I talk about young boys really making themselves larger than life. Playing small is when you show up as a a smaller version of yourself. You don't speak too loudly. You don't speak too boldly. You don't grab what you want, right? You're content to sort of stay behind just a little bit so you don't draw too much attention to yourself, because there's a lot of fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of rejection, and a lot of conditioning about being a nurture. I remember even with our kids when they were young, I've got a daughter and 2 boys. And if there were only 2 brownies left on the plate, my daughter would go, "That's okay. The boys can have it." And my husband's like, "Oh, Jade, you're so nice." And poor Don probably didn't know what hit him, because I'd be like, "No, Jade is not giving up the extra brownie on the plate to her brother. She is entitled to have her fair share of the brownie." So when I say play small, it's about keeping yourself smaller, not thinking big, and not even living into your own full vision or dreams. I think women, much more than men, are more likely to do what is expected of them rather than truly following their own passion in life.
And one of the takeaways that I highlighted for today's show, you say in your book, and of course we all kind of recognize this, but someone has to remind us, people who ask for more frequently get it.
Absolutely.
And I think if we write down anything, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think we should take that down in our notes, because even if we do it once a week, at the end of the year, we have 52 more of something, whether it's free ketchup or extra sugar for our coffee or whatever. But there's something there, right? I love that.
Oh, it is so true. And in staggering numbers. I mean, people who ask for things are significantly more likely to get them. And one of the things I share in the book, I mean, a friend of mine, and I confess, even myself, who advocates for asking for more, was always mortified. But we would go to film festivals together, and she was so brazen, Bill. Like, my gosh, she would just, go into, if she saw a star-studded party at the film festival, she would just walk in as if she owned the place. And, people are walking by with champagne, she'd grab it. And we were in a hotel lobby one time, and Colin Farrell walked by, who I love, right? And as he passed, I just very quietly said, "Oh, did you just see that was Colin Farrell who walked by?" And she's like, "Colin Farrell went," and left me standing in the dust while she ran back to the elevator, stuck her hand in the door, jumped in and said, "Colin, I love you. Can I get a picture with you?" And, so here it is. She asked, she walked away with a close-up picture of her and Colin Farrell while I was waiting in the lobby, because I didn't ask.
And I mean, to be honest, I would have been the same way. I'm the one who would say, "Oh, I don't want to interrupt them. They might not like it. They might be on their way to a screening or something important in their field." But if you don't ask, and who knows what other opportunities may have come from that other than a good story. And I remember that from your book and seeing that. Cindy, you give us some drills, and one of them that I thought was very good for people, again, as a takeaway from today's show, to just make a list of when you didn't ask for something you wanted. And maybe I'm going to add to it, take a small window, a week or 3 or 5 days, whatever you think is appropriate. But I'm sure there's several times we were quiet when we could have said something, and who knows how that may have changed things.
Absolutely. I love that. And thank you for pointing that out, because, of all the interviews I've done, nobody's ever picked that up. And I think it's that exploration, that willingness to look at our patterns that are going to help us step into the most powerful version of ourselves, right? What are the ways that we've kept ourselves small? What are things we wanted that we didn't ask for? And to really explore it, both, because we always think about business, and I really invite people to stretch and keep expanding that definition of negotiation. Think about it in your personal life as well as your professional life. And how could things have been different had you maybe been a little bolder and stepped up to ask for what you wanted?
And maybe along with that, tell us, what is a brag journal?
Yeah, it's one of the first exercises I do with my clients. And I get a lot of eye rolling at first, but it ends up being a really powerful, typically a really transformational experience. I think that, and this applies for men or women, this is not a gender-based issue, but I think for women in particular, because they're more likely to play small, I always have them, I give them a little leather-bound journal, and I ask them to call it their brag journal. And I have them start by listing 25 things that they can love or appreciate about themselves. And then the idea is every night as you're going to bed, just before you're ready to go to sleep, when your brain's a little more open and receptive to that subconscious, you read over your list and add 5 more things that you can be proud of from that day or that you appreciate. And I tell you, when I do this at live events, it is stunning to me, Bill, how often I'll have a room of women and I ask that question. I have them to list 25 things they love about themselves. And invariably, at least half to as many as 3/4 of the room sit there in kind of stunned silence with a pen in their hand, unable to even come up with 25 things. I believe that we can't get our value externally. One of the keys to showing up as a really confident negotiator to negotiate your best life is having internal validation, that unconditional self-love, as corny as that may sound. And that starts from appreciating things about ourselves that we can recognize as skills or gifts we bring to the table.
Cindy, I have a ton more questions. I want to get them into you, but before we get into those, I want our audience to know that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan. Our guest is Cindy Watson. Her book is The Art of Feminine Negotiation, and that's what we're learning about today. And Cindy, could you tell us about the website?
Yeah, definitely. If this is an interest to you, and I think all of life is a negotiation, go check out artoffemininenegotiation.com. And I'm offering an extra bonus to you guys. If you go to artoffemininenegotiationbook.com, there are all kinds of free resources and exercises that you can go through. Even if you haven't got the book, you'll definitely get some value out of it.
And if you missed any part of the show, or if you just want to talk about this with your spouse or your friend, you can go to nccradio.org for a podcast of our show. Just look for The Art of Feminine Negotiation. Look for our guest, Cindy Watson. And of course, it's under the name of our show, Secrets of Success. No cost. You can do that anytime, any place. Cindy, in your book, you mentioned 6 key skill sets of effective negotiation. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, that was probably the starting point of, for me, this creation of this Art of Feminine Negotiation model. And interestingly, I mean, I won't go into too much detail, but as you probably read, my daughter had to have open heart surgery as a baby. And I was in full on barracuda litigation mode in my legal practice at that time. And you would have thought if there was ever a time that barracuda would have shown up, that would have been it, when we were basically fighting for her life every day. And it wasn't until later, I'm embarrassed to say, I recognized that I didn't show up that way. I was coming from a place of intuitive, sort of feminine, maternal energy, for want of a better term. So every day I would show up trying to build rapport with the doctors, with the nurses, with the administrators. I was bringing empathy to the table in all of my discussions with them. I was having to stay flexible because the ground kept kind of shifting under our feet. We were there for almost 3 months in critical care. I had to trust my intuition. I mean, this was medical terminology I'd never heard of, and yet I was going head to head with leading cardiologists and having to trust that intuition and build trust with them. And then later, I think that was probably my first whisper of the art of feminine negotiation, though I didn't know it at the time. So it's based on a model. If you look at the 6 key skills that make and mark the most effective negotiators, sort of through history and globally, it comes down to 6 key qualities. So I call it the R-FIT because it's just an easy acronym to remember. So it's AREFIT. So the A is for assertiveness. And that one most people consider to be masculine, but I actually think that's because they conflate assertive with aggressive, and they're not the same thing. But the other 5 key skills that most experts agree and acknowledge make for the best negotiators are traits that people would consider to be feminine skills. And yet we don't recognize that feminine power in negotiations. So the R is rapport building. The E is empathy. F is flexibility. I is for intuition, and T is trust. So just think R-FIT. You are fit to be a great negotiator. It's an easy mnemonic or way to remember those 6 key skill sets.
I think there's a chapter or a subheading that says, go for no. Now, that almost seems like a mistake, but I know from seeing your laughter, you meant it. But can you explain how that applies to a negotiation, and why would we go for no? Don't we always want the yes, and we want people to, agreeing with us?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there are 2 levels to it. I mean, one, I think most people who are nervous and not really confident negotiators fear rejection. They fear getting that no. We're very conditioned. And I think women more than men, but I think it applies across the board. We're afraid of getting that no and being turned down because we see that as failure. So there's that fear of failure wrapped in. So if we can find a way to desensitize ourselves to the word no, it allows us to show up more powerfully. And there's a book actually called Go for No. The concept behind it is if you're a salesperson, for example, if you need to get 100 sales and, for every sales you need to make, if you need 10 sales, but to get 10 sales, you need to make 100 calls. You've got a 10% conversion rate. If we're thinking, as we're starting to make those calls, I need that yes, maybe we get that first yes, and then we kind of take off our foot off the gas a little bit, or we start getting no's and we get demoralized and we procrastinate, we hesitate to go in. Whereas if we shifted in our mind going, hey, I'm going to be making this pitch and I'm okay going for no, then as we're going through, we get the no's and it's like, okay, all right, that's one no. I've got 99 more no's to go. And as we get those yeses, we keep going. So we build momentum and we desensitize ourselves to the word no. So that's one piece. The other piece of it is we're often taught that, get people to say yes, yes, yes. Ask closed questions in a negotiation and you want to get a yes answer so that then by the time you get to the thing you want, you're almost tricking them into giving you a yes. And I think that comes from that more competitive mindset of negotiating. If we actually want negotiations where we get better buy-in, better relationships, longer lasting agreements, better solutions, it's about having the other party know they've got the freedom to say no. It's surrendering that ego, making it about them, letting them feel like they have control in the process. You're going to get much more vulnerability and probably much more open conversations to find better solutions. So that's the concept behind Go for No.
Suppose we have someone who's fairly new on the job. They've been with the company maybe a few weeks, and tomorrow they're told they're going to go out and be making a major sale or sales during the day or a negotiation in the legal or business world. How would you tell them to prepare for that?
Well, I would say certainly our fit is one of the models. And even though it was the first one I came with, it's sort of the last model that I think that you apply when you're preparing. I think most people don't prepare well for negotiations at all. And even the vast majority of the books that I read just talk about the tactics or getting clarity around the concrete, substantive things you want. And to me, the most important part of preparation for a negotiation is actually going through some other very simple models. And one of them I call the no fear model, for example. Again, you can tell I like acronyms. I think it's easier to remember. So it's simply FEAR, fear, ego, attachment, and reactivity. So especially for a newbie hire, as per your question, I would really encourage them to just take a little bit. It sounds like it's a big job, but when you practice, it's like a really quick mental checklist, frankly. So go through and recognize, all right, what are some of the fears that I'm bringing to the table here? Am I afraid of failing, afraid of success, afraid of rejection, fear of the unknown? What are some of the fears I'm bringing to the table? And what are the likely fears that this other party in this big deal I'm trying to get are coming to the table with? Because if I can recognize their fears, I'm going to be better equipped to respond and be able to get better outcomes by addressing those fears in the negotiation. And then you go through the quick checklist with E for ego. How does ego show up for me? Do I talk too much? Do I not admit things when I don't know them? How is ego likely to show up for the other party? And how can I use that to my benefit by letting their ego feel fed in ways that aren't going to take away from my ability to get what I need? The A is attachment. What are those things that I'm too attached to? I've seen people walk away from great deals because they got so attached to this tunnel version. And I've seen people bargain way past the point where it makes sense because they got so attached to the deal. And the final R is reactivity. Be honest with yourself. What are those triggers that are likely to get me off course and cause me to be reactive? And how can I ground myself
Cindy,
to avoid that?
We're having much too much fun, and the time goes too quickly when we do that. I want our audience to remember the title, The Art of Feminine Negotiation. The author's name is simple, Cindy Watson, Watson. And Cindy, give us that website real quick.
artoffemininenegotiation.com.
I'd like our audience to know that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.